The rain came down in sheets the night everything changed. Not the soft, romantic kind of rain that makes people pull their collars up and smile at the sky. This was the kind of rain that meant business, the kind that came in sideways and soaked through everything. Coats, shoes, dignity. The kind that reminded you that the city did not care about you, not even a little. Inside a black armored car moving through the slick, soul-adjacent streets of the city's most dangerous district, Seojin sat in the back seat like a man who had never once been rained on in his life. He was 41, sharp jaw, sharper eyes, the kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful. It was loaded. An expensive three-piece suit, a phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and even, each word landing like a period at the end of a sentence that could not be revised. "Hey, pull the contract," he said, "and make sure Park understands why." That was all. No raised voice, no threat, no explanation. Just four words and the understanding. The absolute bones-deep understanding. That whatever happened to Park next was already decided. He ended the call. Silence settled back into the car the way it always did around Seojin. Quickly, completely, like it was grateful for the chance. In the seat beside him, not touching him, not even close to touching him, sat his 7-year-old son. Min Jae-han was dressed in a tiny navy suit with a white collar, his small shoes polished to a mirror shine, his dark hair combed precisely to one side. He looked like a miniature version of his father. That was intentional. His father had arranged that too, but Min Jae was not looking at his father. He was looking out the window. The car slowed at a red light, and through the rain-blurred glass, Min Jae saw them. A little boy, maybe 6, in a bright yellow raincoat, jumping into every puddle on the sidewalk, like he had been specifically put on this earth to destroy it. No umbrella, no self-preservation instinct whatsoever. Just pure, weaponized joy. And then, the woman. She burst out of the doorway of a small laundromat with her hood half up and a grocery bag swinging from one wrist, and she called out to that little boy with her whole chest, "Cairo Elijah Vaughn, if you jump in one more puddle, I am going to lose my entire mind." The boy turned around, saw her face, and jumped in the biggest puddle yet. And she, this woman, soaking wet, one shoe already dark with water, a grocery bag slipping. She threw her head back and laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a tired laugh. A real one. The kind that comes from somewhere below the ribs. She ran to him, caught him mid-jump, lifted him, spun him, pressed her face into his neck while he screamed with delight. She didn't care about the rain. She didn't care about her shoes or the bag or the water running down her collar. She just held her son. In the back seat of the armored car, Min Jae-han pressed his small palm flat against the cold glass. He watched the boy in the yellow raincoat. He watched the woman hold him like he was the most valuable thing in the city. He watched them disappear as the light turned green and the car began to move again. He didn't say anything. He never said anything. But his small palm stayed on the glass long after they were gone. Han Seojin did not notice. He was already on another call. Have you ever had parents too busy to care? Or are you the busy parent? If that little boy's loneliness hit you somewhere deep, you are exactly who this story's for. Subscribe right now because what comes next will not let you go. Her name was Mira Vaughn, 29 years old, single mother, independent by necessity and by choice, in that order. She had the kind of face that made people want to tell her their problems, and the kind of eyes that let them know she already had enough of her own. She had moved to this city 14 months ago with 2 suitcases, 1 child, and a list of 3 contacts she trusted. She had since whittled that list down to 2. Tonight, standing outside the laundromat with her laughing, soaked son on her hip and her phone buzzing against her thigh, she felt the specific exhaustion of a woman who was doing everything right and still coming up short. She checked the phone, a message from her client. Going a different direction with the catering contract. Sorry for the late notice. Late notice. It was 9:30 at night. She stood there for a moment, the rain softening slightly, Cairo now patting her cheek with a wet hand going, "Mama, Mama, Mama," like a tiny earnest alarm. "I know, baby," she said quietly. "I know." She did not cry. She didn't have time for that. She had $43 in her checking account, a light bill due Friday, and a 6-year-old who needed dinner. So she tightened her grip on the grocery bag, squared her shoulders in the rain, and walked. The diner on the corner of 5th and Marlowe was open 24 hours. It was the kind of place that smelled like coffee and old decisions. The kind of place where the booths had duct tape on the seats and the menus had laminate peeling at the corners, and nobody looked at you twice, no matter who you were. Which was exactly why it was strange that when Mira pushed through the door with Cairo in tow, the woman at the counter, Linda, who Mira had seen 100 times, went visibly still. Not scared, just still, like an animal that had spotted something in the tree line. Mira looked around. In the corner booth, facing the door, the way men who expected trouble always faced the door, sat Han Seojin. Across from him, sitting perfectly straight in his tiny navy suit, was Min-jae. They were not talking. They were not looking at each other. They were simply sitting in the same booth eating soup, two people who shared blood and almost nothing else. Mira almost turned around. She genuinely almost did. Then Cairo saw Min-jae. "Mama." His voice was a low, reverent whisper. "That boy has a really cool tie." Before she could stop him, before she could grab even one piece of his raincoat, Cairo Vaughn walked directly across the diner and stood at the edge of a Korean Mafia boss's booth. "Hi," he said to Min-jae. "I like your tie. I have a dinosaur tie, but I got ketchup on it." Min-jae stared at him. 7 years old, the composure of a 45-year-old diplomat. Then, so quietly, it was almost not a sound at all, he said, "Dinosaurs are scientifically significant." Cairo blinked. Then his whole face opened up like a window. "Ah, I know." Mira arrived at the booth with the energy of someone diffusing a very small, very enthusiastic bomb. "Cairo, I am so sorry, Chan," she started. She looked up and found Han Seojin looking at her. Not the way men usually looked at her in diners. Not with assessment or dismissal or the particular specific exhaustion of men who thought single mothers were either sad stories or easy targets. He was just looking. Fully present. Like he had nowhere else to be, which she suspected was an absolute lie. "Sit," he said. It wasn't quite a question. It wasn't quite an order either. It was the kind of word that came from a man who was used to both and had grown bored of the distinction. "We're fine standing," Mira said pleasantly. Min-jae looked at Cairo. Cairo was already half climbing into the booth beside him. "Cairo," Mira said, with the specific tone that mothers develop. Part warning, part prayer. "He can sit," Seojin said. And then, quieter, almost like it surprised him. "You both can." She sat. Because Cairo was already seated. Because they hadn't eaten. Because $43 didn't stretch to pride tonight. And because something in her, the part of her she didn't examine too closely, was curious. They talked for 22 minutes. Not long. Not intimately. But in those 22 minutes, Mira learned 3 things about Han Seojin. He was extraordinarily careful with his words. He watched his son the way you watch something that might break. And he had not laughed once. Not even when Cairo knocked the salt shaker off the table and it hit the floor. And he very seriously said, "That's 7 years of bad salt." And the whole diner went quiet for a second, and even Minja's mouth twitched. Seojin did not laugh, but he watched the moment. He saved it somewhere behind his eyes. When they left, walking out into a lighter rain, Mira told herself it meant nothing. She told herself this with great conviction. She told herself this all the way home. 3 days later, Han Seojin was in the middle of a meeting that could have ended careers, and he was thinking about the way Mira Vaughn had said, "We're fine standing," without flinching. "Sir," he came back to the room. 5 men around a table, all of them waiting. "Continue," he said. But the word sat in the back of his mind like a pebble in a shoe. "We're fine standing." Nobody said that to him. Nobody stood in front of him and said, "We're fine," like it was a complete sentence. Like she didn't need anything from him and found the suggestion mildly amusing. He didn't know what to do with that. Across the city, Mira was on her 3rd job application of the morning. She had already been rejected from one, ghosted by another, and was now on hold with an events company that was playing music she actively disliked. On the couch behind her, Cairo was drawing. He did this constantly. covered every surface available to him with drawings. Today, it appeared to be a series of what Mira could only describe as two stick figures in suits, one very small, one with a very serious face. "Who is that?" she asked, pulling the phone from her ear during a particularly offensive saxophone solo. "Min-jae and his dad," Cairo said without looking up. "I'm going to give it to him next time." "Next time," Mira repeated, "when we see them again." "Baby, we're probably not going to see them again." Cairo looked up at her with the patient expression of a child who has decided his mother does not know everything. "We will," he said, and went back to drawing. They saw them again 4 days later. Cairo crowed. If you are curious about the next meeting, hit that subscribe button right now. The park was public, neutral, and supposed to be safe. Mira had brought Cairo for the afternoon, needing air and open space and a moment to think about the events contract she'd finally landed. Small, underpaid, but real. She was sitting on a bench with her notebook when she heard the very distinctive sound of her son screaming "Min-jae" across a playground with the energy of someone who had found a long-lost sibling. She looked up. Han Seojin was standing on the far side of the playground in a dark coat, hands in his pockets, watching his son with the focused stillness of a man who did not know how to simply watch something without it becoming surveillance. He turned when Cairo's voice cut across the park. His eyes found Mira's. There was a beat, a specific loaded beat, where both of them recognized the same thing. The children were already reunited, already deep in a negotiation about which slide was superior, already completely beyond intervention. Seojin walked over. He sat on the bench, not next to her. There was a full foot of space between them, and he maintained it with the precision of a man who measured everything. "Your son has strong opinions," he said, watching Cairo physically demonstrate, with his whole body, why the blue slide was objectively superior. "He comes by it honestly," Mira said. A pause. The particular comfortable, uncomfortable pause of two people who don't know each other well enough to fill silence, but know each other just enough to find it interesting. "You work in events," he said. Not a question. He said it the way someone says something they already know. Mira turned and looked at him. Directly. The way she looked at things she was assessing. "How do you know that?" The pause this time was different. "You mentioned it at the diner," he said. You were on a call." She had been on a call. That was true. She tried to remember if she'd said it out loud or just held the phone to her ear while she waited on hold. She wasn't certain. She chose to let it go. For now. They talked. Not easily. There was nothing easy about Han Seojin. She was increasingly sure of that. But genuinely. He asked questions that were too precise and listened to her answers with a focus that was almost uncomfortable. She asked him about his work, and he said logistics, with the same expression a person might use to say classified, and she filed that away. "You don't trust me," he said at one point. Flat, observational. "I don't know you," she said. Same thing. "No," she said, "it's not. Not trusting someone I don't know is just common sense. I'm not trusting someone I do know as a response to evidence." He looked at her for a long moment. "Which would you prefer?" She stood up, calling Cairo's name, and said, "That's not a question you ask someone you just met." She left first. She always left first. That felt important. But that night she thought about the question. Not about him. Just the question. Which would you prefer? She fell asleep before she answered it, even to herself. The news report came on a Tuesday morning while Mira was making Cairo's lunch. She wasn't paying attention at first. Cairo was arguing passionately and at length about whether cheese counted as a topping or a foundation, and she was engaged in that negotiation with the exhausted diplomacy it required. Then she heard the name. As part of the ongoing investigation into organized crime networks operating within the city's financial district, sources have confirmed that Han Industries is currently under review for... She set the knife down. Han Industries. The reporter's voice continued, threading through words like money laundering and alleged connections and several prominent figures. Mira stood very still at her kitchen counter and let the information arrange itself in her mind the way you arrange furniture in a room you didn't know you were moving into. "Mama, Is the cheese a topping? Yes, she said, cheese is a topping. But what about Cairo? Cheese, topping, done. She turned off the television. Then she put Cairo's lunch in his bag, dropped him at school, drove 45 minutes across the city, then walked into Han Seojin's building, a clean glass and steel tower in the financial district, told the front desk she was there to see Mr. Han, and when they said did she have an appointment, she said no. Tell him Mira Vaughn is here. He'll know. She was in his office in 7 minutes. She had not thought about what she would say. She should have thought about what she would say. Walking into a room with Han Seojin without a prepared statement was, she realized the moment she stepped inside, the equivalent of walking into a board meeting in pajamas. He was standing at the window, hands clasped behind his back. City stretching out below like it was his, and he was simply allowing it to operate. Logistics, she said. He turned. He did not look surprised. He did not look anything, technically. But she was beginning to understand that with Seojin, the absence of expression was its own kind of expression. I heard the news this morning, she said. Han Industries, your name. My name appears in many things. Organized crime investigations? He said nothing. I have a 6-year-old, Mira said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. A 6-year-old who drew a picture of your son to give to him, who asks me every morning if we're going to see Minjae today. I need you to tell me, right now, whether I should be protecting my son from yours. Something moved across Seojin's face, fast, almost invisible, but she caught it. My son, he said slowly, is 7 years old. I know that. That's not what I asked. He walked to his desk. He did not sit. He set both hands on the surface and looked at her across it. The investigation is politically motivated. Han Industries operates within legal frameworks. That's a press release, she said, not an answer. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. It pressed against the walls of the room. Mira did not fill it. She'd learned a long time ago that the person who fills the silence first is usually the one who loses. You are not in danger, he said finally. From what? He didn't answer that either. She picked up her bag. I think I need to be careful, she said quietly. Not angry, not dramatic. Just honest, the way she was when things mattered. I think I need to keep some distance. She left. The elevator ride down was 22 floors, and she held herself together for all 22 of them. In his office, Han Seojin stood at the window again. He watched a black car that wasn't his, parked on the street below at an angle it had no reason to be. It had been there for 3 days. He picked up his phone. Find out who's watching the Vaughn woman, he said, and why. Wait, did he know they were watching her before she walked in? Subscribe and keep watching. This is only getting darker. Mira noticed the car on Wednesday. Same black sedan, different street, but the same dent above the rear left wheel well. She noticed because she noticed things. It was a survival skill she'd developed long before she had a child to protect. She noticed it again Thursday morning outside Cairo's school, and Thursday afternoon outside the grocery store, and Thursday night on her block, engine off, no one getting in or out. She did not call Han Seojin. She had made a decision about Han Seojin, and she was going to respect it, even if some very unhelpful part of her brain was pointing out that he was probably the one person in this city with the resources to actually do something about a black sedan that moved like a shadow. Instead, she called her friend Denise, who was sensible and no nonsense, and would tell her if she was being paranoid. Girl, Denise said after Mira described the car, you are not being paranoid. That's not helpful, Denise. You need to call the police and tell them what? A dented car keeps parking near me? Tell them. Denise paused. Okay, you need to tell me who you've been talking to, Mira. This started right after you went to that man's office. Mira pressed her forehead against the cool of her window. Outside, the street was empty. For now. I know, she said. On Friday morning, the car was gone. Mira stood at her window with her coffee and felt the specific confusion of someone who had been braced for something and found nothing. It was almost worse. At 7:14 p.m. that same Friday, someone knocked on her door. She looked through the peephole. Han Seojin stood in her hallway in his dark coat, hands at his sides, looking at her door with the expression of a man who had not knocked on many doors in his life and was discovering it felt different from the inside. She opened it anyway, because she was done pretending she wouldn't. "You need to tell me what you did," she said before he could speak. "You were being watched," he said. "You're no longer being watched." "By who?" "A competitor who believed targeting you was a message to me." The words landed with weight she hadn't braced for. "They targeted me," she said carefully, "because of you." "Yes." "And you eliminated the threat." "Yes." "So you created the problem and then solved it. And now you're standing at my door expecting—" "What exactly?" He opened his mouth. He closed it. Which was, she realized, probably the first time Han Seojin had ever opened his mouth, without knowing what was going to come out of it. "I don't know," he said. 3 words. Plain as rain. And somehow, they landed harder than anything else he'd said. From behind her, very small and very clear. "Is that Min-jae's dad?" Mira closed her eyes briefly, opened them. "Yes, Cairo." "Can he come in?" "Nay, I finished the drawing." There was a silence. Seojin looked at her. She looked at him. Somewhere in that silence was an entire conversation neither of them had agreed to have. "For 10 minutes," she said. "Take your shoes off at the door." He took his shoes off at the door. And something about seeing Han Seojin, the man who made decisions in 4 words, who controlled entire districts of the city, who had 2 men watching from the street outside even now, standing in her narrow hallway in his socks, holding a child's drawing of himself and his son, looking at it like he didn't know what to do with something that was simply given to him. That almost undid her. Almost. The argument came 9 minutes in. Cairo had fallen asleep on the couch. He did this, so dropped unconscious mid-activity like a phone at 1%. And Mira and Seojin were standing in her kitchen with 2 cups of tea that had been offered and accepted, before either of them thought too hard about the implications. "I would like to ensure your safety," he said, formally. "There are resources." "No," she said. "You don't know what I was going to say." "You were going to say drivers, possibly a secured apartment, maybe a number to call that isn't the police. I've seen this before. I know what this is." "What is it?" "It's control with a gift wrap," she said. "You put me in a car you own, and now I belong to a world I did not choose." "No." He set his cup down, hard enough that the sound made a statement. "I am trying to keep you safe." "You're trying to manage a situation that you created," she said. "And I am the situation." "That's not— Am I wrong?" The word landed like a gavel. He didn't answer, which meant she wasn't wrong. "I know you think you're protecting me," she said, quieter now, because Cairo was sleeping and because she was tired and because some part of her understood this man in a way that didn't entirely serve her. "But I have been protected before, by men who decided what I needed and arranged it without asking. And every single time it ended with me smaller than when I started. I will not do that again." He looked at her. Really looked. The kind of looking that gathered everything in the room, waited, and then didn't speak, because it hadn't finished calculating. "I understand," he said at last. He said it like a man who was saying it for the first time, and wasn't sure if it was true yet, son, but meant to find out. "Do you?" "No," he said honestly. "But I want to." On the couch, Cairo shifted in his sleep and muttered something that sounded like it was definitely about dinosaurs. Both of them looked at him, in spite of everything. In spite of everything, they both almost smiled. 3 weeks passed. In those 3 weeks, Seojin did something that cost him more effort than anything he'd done in years. He did nothing. Not nothing in the literal sense. His world continued its rotation, meetings, negotiations, the constant management of men and money and information. But with regard to Mira Vaughn, he removed every resource he had quietly positioned around her life, and he waited. He did not call. He did not send anything to her door. He did not arrange for her events contract to go well, and even when it would have been effortless. He waited. For the first time in a very long time, Han Seojin simply waited. It was, he noted, absolutely terrible. Min-jae, who noticed more than his father gave him credit for, said nothing until the 3rd week. Then, at breakfast, very precisely, he said, Are we going to see Cairo and his mother again? Seojin looked at his son. I don't know, he said. Minjae considered this. I think we should, he said. I told him about the Bronze period, and he wants to know more. And also, he paused, arranging his words with the deliberate care of a child, choosing exactly the right ones. He makes you look different. Different how? Like you are actually there, Minji said, and returned to his rice. Han Seojin sat with that sentence for the rest of the morning. Across the city, Mir's events contract had gone better than expected. She'd been offered a follow-up. She had paid the light bill and the next month's rent simultaneously, something that had not happened in over a year, and she'd sat on the bathroom floor at 11 p.m. and let herself cry for about 4 minutes because she deserved that. She was building something. Slowly, carefully on ground, she had prepared herself. The problem was that Cairo asked about Minjae every 3 days with the steady persistence of dripping water on stone. Mama. Yes. Did Minjae's dad do something bad? She thought about how to answer that in a way that was honest and age-appropriate, and didn't require her to explain organized crime to a first grader. He lives in a complicated world, she said. Cairo chewed on this. Like when Jalen's dad went to prison and came back and his mom said he was complicated? That's... She paused. A little bit like that, yes. But Jalen still plays with us, Cairo said, because Jalen didn't do anything. She looked at her son, 6 years old. Clearer than most adults she knew. Yeah, she said softly. You're right about that. She called Seojin that night. He picked up on the second ring, which told her he'd been waiting. Cairo wants to see Minjae, she said. I want to make that possible without crossing lines I've already drawn. Can you tell me honestly whether that's achievable? A pause, not calculating. She'd learned to tell the difference. I've been removing myself from certain areas, he said. It's a process, but yes, I think it's achievable. Why? She asked. He didn't answer immediately. Minjae told me I look like I'm actually there, he said finally, when I'm around you. I haven't been somewhere in a long time. She sat with that. That's a lot to put on a woman you've known for 6 weeks, she said. I know, he said. And then, the quietest she'd ever heard him, I know that. They met at the park the following Saturday. Not as anything with a name. Just 2 parents and 2 boys who had decided, with children's uncomplicated certainty, that they were already friends. Minjae arrived with a book about the Bronze Age that he had clearly purchased specifically for this occasion. Cairo arrived with a crayon drawing of a dinosaur wearing a tie. For you, he told Minjae very seriously. Minjae looked at it for a long moment. He appears to be a brachiosaurus, he said. Informal wear. He is going to a very important meeting, Cairo confirmed. Minjae carefully folded the drawing and put it in his coat pocket. Thank you, he said, with the solemnity of someone accepting a state document. Beside her on the bench, she felt Seojin exhale. Slow, quiet. The kind of exhale you don't know you've been holding. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. That evening, as the light went gold across the park, and both boys collapsed in the grass, arguing about whether a brachiosaurus could fit in an elevator, Seojin turned to her and asked the question he'd been building toward for weeks. Why did you stay, he said, in the city, after everything became complicated? She knew what he was really asking, and she chose to answer the real question. Because leaving is the easy answer, she said. And I don't take easy answers when hard ones are realer. He was quiet. I don't know how to do this, he said. I know how to control things, protect things, manage outcomes. I don't know how to... He stopped, started again. I don't know how to be present without making it about control. I recognize that now. That's more honest than most men get in years, she said. Is it enough? It's a start, she said. Here are the terms. You don't make decisions for me. You don't arrange things without asking. You don't put resources around my life without my knowledge. You tell me the truth when I ask, even when it's complicated. And in return? She thought about it. In return, I don't require you to be something you haven't become yet. I just ask that you're trying. He looked at her for a long time. That's a fair negotiation, he said. It's not a negotiation, she said. It's a conversation. There's a difference. He almost smiled. The corner of his mouth made a movement it wasn't used to. There is, he agreed. In the grass, Cairo had now declared at volume that the Brachiosaurus could fit in an elevator if it put its neck down, and Minjay was explaining patiently and at length why that was structurally incorrect. And somehow the two of them had arrived at an agreement to draw the engineering solution together, which meant both of them were now flat on their stomachs in the grass with a notebook between them. The light was gold. The park was quiet. Two boys solved a problem they'd invented together. Mira reached across the bench and took Seojin's hand, not because she had stopped being careful, not because the world he came from had become simple, not because she was rescued or swept away or any of the things stories like to say about women who choose complicated men. She took his hand because she saw his effort, because 3 weeks of silence was its own kind of language, and she spoke it, because Minjay had a brachiosaurus in a tie, folded in his coat pocket, given to him by a child who saw his loneliness from a rain-blurred car window and decided, with 6-year-old certainty, to fix it, because she chose this. Not from need, not from rescue, from choice. Seojin looked down at their joined hands, then up at her. "Why did you stay?" he asked again, the real question this time, fully meant. She looked at their sons in the grass. She looked at him. "Because I saw you trying," she said. "And I wanted to see what you became." The light held. The city moved around them, indifferent and relentless, the way cities always are. But in that bench, in that park, in the warm gold of a Saturday evening, Han Seojin was exactly where he was. And for the first time in longer than he could measure, that was enough. If this story held you from that first rainy night all the way to this bench, then you already know what to do. Like this video. Subscribe right now. Share it with every woman in your life who has ever held herself together in the rain and refused to let anyone see it. Turn on notifications because the next story is already coming for your heart. And drop a comment below. Tell me, would you have taken his hand?